In March 1954, just 1 year after Joseph Stalin's death, ended 3 decades of terror that had killed millions of Soviet citizens through purges, executions, and forced labor camps, the Soviet government created a new security agency called the KGB, the Committee for State Security, consolidating intelligence gathering, domestic surveillance, border control, and secret police functions into a single organization that would become one of the most feared and effective intelligence services in history. The decision shocked Western intelligence agencies who had hoped that Stalin's death might mean relaxation of the Soviet police state. But instead, the creation of the KGB represented the institutionalization and rationalization of surveillance and repression, transforming the chaotic terror of Stalin's NKVD into a sophisticated bureaucracy that would control Soviet citizens through comprehensive monitoring rather than random mass killings, while simultaneously running espionage operations across the world that penetrated Western governments, stole nuclear secrets, assassinated defectors and dissidents on foreign soil, and waged a secret war against the United States and its allies that most people would never see or understand. The KGB's operations shaped the Cold War, determined the fates of millions living under communist rule, created the surveillance techniques that authoritarian states still use today, and produced Vladimir Putin, who spent 16 years as a KGB officer, learning methods of control and intelligence gathering that he would later apply as Russia's president, demonstrating that understanding what the KGB actually did is essential to understanding not just Soviet history, but the world we live in now, where former KGB officers run Russia and employ the same tactics of surveillance, disinformation, and assassination that the organization perfected during its 37 years, controlling the Soviet Union from 1954 until its dissolution in 1991 when the USSR collapsed. The KGB was created on March 13, 1954, through the reorganization of Soviet security services that had existed in various forms since the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, when Lenin established the Cheka to hunt down counter-revolutionaries and enemies of the new communist state. The Cheka became the GPU, then the OGPU, then the NKVD under Stalin, each reorganization changing the name but maintaining the core function of crushing opposition to communist rule through surveillance, arrest, torture, and execution. Stalin's NKVD under Lavrenti Beria conducted the Great Terror of 1936 to 1938 that killed somewhere between 600,000 and 1.2 million people through mass arrests, show trials, and executions that targeted old Bolsheviks, military officers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens accused of being enemies of the people in a paranoid campaign that demonstrated the unlimited power of the secret police to destroy anyone Stalin designated as a threat. After Stalin's death in March 1953, the new Soviet leadership under Nikita Khrushchev arrested Beria and executed him in December 1953, then reorganized the security services to prevent any single individual from controlling the apparatus of repression the way Beria had, creating the KGB as an organization that would answer to the Communist Party leadership collectively rather than to one dictator. The KGB's structure reflected its comprehensive mission to control Soviet society and conduct operations abroad, organized into directorates that handled different aspects of security and intelligence work. The first chief directorate conducted foreign intelligence operations, recruiting spies in Western countries, stealing technology and military secrets, running disinformation campaigns, and conducting covert actions to undermine enemies of the Soviet Union. The second chief directorate handled counterintelligence within the USSR, monitoring foreign diplomats and journalists, hunting for Western spies operating in Soviet territory and preventing Soviet citizens from having unauthorized contact with foreigners. The Third Directorate monitored the Soviet military to ensure loyalty and prevent coups. The Fifth Directorate, created in 1967, specialized in suppressing political dissent and monitoring intellectuals, religious believers, and nationalist movements in Soviet republics. The Seventh Directorate conducted surveillance operations. The Eighth Directorate handled communications intelligence and cryptography. Border guards controlled all Soviet borders, and additional departments handled physical security for Soviet leaders, ran training academies, and managed the organization's vast bureaucracy. At its peak, the KGB employed approximately 480,000 people, including 200,000 border guards, making it one of the largest security organizations in the world. But the real extent of its surveillance network went far beyond official employees, because the KGB recruited hundreds of thousands of informants who reported on their neighbors, colleagues, family members, and friends in exchange for privileges, protection, or simply out of fear of what would happen if they refused to cooperate. Every apartment building had informants who reported suspicious activities or conversations. Every workplace had employees who reported colleagues making politically incorrect statements. Every university had students who reported professors whose lectures deviated from approved ideology. The result was a society where no one could trust anyone, where private conversations might be reported to authorities, where even family members might inform on each other, creating an atmosphere of fear and self-censorship that made open opposition to the regime nearly impossible without risking arrest. The KGB's domestic operations focused on identifying and neutralizing anyone who might challenge communist rule or spread ideas that contradicted official ideology, targeting political dissidents who criticized the Soviet system, religious believers who maintained faith despite official atheism, nationalists in Soviet republics who wanted independence or greater autonomy, intellectuals who read or distributed banned books and publications, and anyone who had contact with foreigners or showed interest in Western culture and ideas. The methods ranged from surveillance and harassment to arrest, imprisonment in labor camps, forced psychiatric treatment in special hospitals where dissidents were drugged and tortured under the guise of medical care, and occasionally execution for those deemed most dangerous to state security. The most famous dissidents hunted by the KGB included Alexander Solzhenitsyn, whose novels The Gulag Archipelago and One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich exposed the brutality of Soviet labor camps, and who was arrested in 1974 and forcibly exiled to the West after the KGB could not silence him through intimidation. Andrei Sakharov, the physicist who helped develop Soviet nuclear weapons but became a human rights activist criticizing the regime, was placed under KGB surveillance, harassed constantly, and eventually exiled to the closed city of Gorky in 1980, where the KGB monitored his every movement and cut him off from supporters. Natan Sharansky, a Jewish refusenik who wanted to emigrate to Israel and advocated for human rights, was arrested in 1977 on fabricated charges of treason and spying for the United States, spent 9 years in labor camps and prisons, and was finally released in a prisoner exchange in 1986. And thousands of others whose names are not famous suffered similar fates. Arrested for writing poetry the KGB deemed subversive, for organizing study groups to read banned books, for attempting to leave the Soviet Union without permission, or simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time when the KGB needed to demonstrate its power. The KGB's foreign intelligence operations achieved remarkable success, penetrating Western governments, military establishments, and intelligence services during the Cold War, recruiting spies who provided the Soviet Union with crucial information about Western military capabilities, political intentions, and technological developments. The most famous spy networks included the Cambridge Five, a group of British intelligence officers and diplomats recruited by Soviet intelligence in the 1930s, who provided secrets to Moscow for decades, including Kim Philby, who rose to senior positions in MI6 and betrayed countless Western operations and agents before defecting to Moscow in 1963. George Blake, a Dutch-born British intelligence officer who worked for the KGB while employed by MI6 from 1953 to 1961, provided the Soviets with information about Western espionage operations in Eastern Europe and betrayed agents who were subsequently arrested and executed. Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer who began spying for the KGB in 1985 and continued until his arrest in 1994, betrayed at least 10 Soviet citizens who were working for the CIA, all of whom were executed, making him one of the most damaging spies in American history. And Robert Hanssen, an FBI agent who spied for Soviet and Russian intelligence from 1979 to 2001, provided classified information about American intelligence capabilities and operations for over 20 years before his arrest. The KGB's success in recruiting Western spies came from sophisticated approaches that targeted vulnerable individuals who had access to classified information, exploiting ideology by recruiting those who sympathized with communism or became disillusioned with Western capitalism, using blackmail against those whose personal secrets could be exposed, including homosexuality, which was illegal in many Western countries, or extramarital affairs that could destroy careers, offering money to those with financial problems or expensive lifestyles they could not afford on government salaries, and employing seduction through agents who developed romantic or relationships with targets to gain their cooperation. The KGB trained its officers in recruitment techniques at specialized schools, teaching them how to identify potential agents, how to approach them without arousing suspicion, how to build trust and dependency, and how to maintain control over agents for years or decades while protecting them from exposure. Beyond espionage, the KGB conducted active measures designed to undermine Western governments and influence global politics through disinformation, forgery, and covert action, spreading false information through media outlets, academic publications, and political organizations to damage Western credibility and promote Soviet interests. Famous operations included Operation Infection in the 1980s, a disinformation campaign claiming that the United States had created the AIDS virus as a biological weapon, a lie that spread through media in multiple countries and influenced public opinion despite being completely false. The KGB forged documents purporting to show American government plans or activities that would embarrass the United States or damage relations with allies. They funded political parties, newspapers, and organizations in Western countries and the developing world that promoted policies favorable to Soviet interests. They conducted influence operations to sway elections, support anti-American movements, and create divisions within Western societies. The KGB's most notorious capability was assassination, eliminating enemies of the Soviet state who had fled abroad or who posed threats that surveillance and harassment could not neutralize, using methods that range from obvious murders designed to send a message to sophisticated operations meant to appear as accidents or natural deaths. In September 1978, Georgy Markov, a Bulgarian dissident living in London, was assassinated when a KGB agent stabbed him with an umbrella modified to inject a tiny pellet containing ricin poison. And Markov died 3 days later while doctors struggled to understand what had killed him until they discovered the pellet during autopsy. In 2006, Alexander Litvinenko, a former FSB officer who had defected to Britain and become a critic of Vladimir Putin, died in London after being poisoned with radioactive polonium-210 that was placed in his tea during a meeting with former KGB officers, an assassination method so exotic and expensive that it could only have been conducted by a state intelligence service, and that British investigators concluded was approved at senior levels of the Russian government. In 2018, Sergei Skripal, a former Russian military intelligence officer who had spied for Britain and been released in a prisoner exchange, was poisoned along with his daughter in Salisbury, England, using a nerve agent called Novichok that was developed by Soviet chemical weapons programs. And while both survived, a British woman who accidentally came into contact with the discarded poison container died, demonstrating that Russian intelligence services continue using KGB assassination methods decades after the Soviet Union's collapse. The KGB played crucial roles in major Cold War events that shaped global history, providing intelligence and operational support for Soviet foreign policy objectives across the world. During the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, when Hungarian citizens rose up against communist rule and briefly created a democratic government, KGB officers worked with Soviet military forces to crush the uprising, identifying leaders of the revolution who were subsequently arrested and executed, helping restore communist control through a combination of military force and intelligence operations that demonstrated how the KGB ensured Soviet dominance over Eastern Europe. In 1968, when the Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia threatened communist control as reformers attempted to create socialism with a human face, the KGB again supported Soviet military intervention, providing intelligence about reform leaders and helping identify who would be arrested or removed from power after Warsaw Pact troops invaded and ended the reform movement. The KGB's largest operational commitment came in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989, when the Soviet Union invaded to support a communist government facing rebellion, and the KGB conducted intelligence operations, ran interrogation centers, hunted resistance leaders, and attempted to penetrate Mujahideen groups fighting Soviet occupation. The KGB's Alpha Group and Vimpel Special Forces units conducted raids and assassinations, while intelligence officers worked to recruit agents within the resistance and spread disinformation to divide the opposition. Despite these efforts, the KGB could not prevent the Soviet defeat in Afghanistan, which contributed to the erosion of Soviet power and credibility that would ultimately lead to the USSR's collapse just 2 years after Soviet forces withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989. The KGB's role in Soviet society extended beyond security and intelligence to include monitoring economic production, investigating corruption, controlling information and censorship, managing relations with foreign communist parties, and serving as the Communist Party's eyes and ears throughout Soviet society, making it not just a security service, but a fundamental pillar of communist rule that touched virtually every aspect of life in the USSR. Soviet citizens knew the KGB was watching, knew that criticism of the system could result in arrest, knew that attempting to leave the country without permission would trigger investigation, and knew that even private conversations might be reported by informants, creating a climate of fear and conformity that made sustained, organized opposition nearly impossible. The culture of the KGB emphasized loyalty to the state above all else, training officers to view themselves as defenders of the Soviet system against internal and external enemies who threatened the socialist future. Officers received privileges, including better housing, access to special stores with goods unavailable to ordinary citizens, opportunities for foreign travel, and the prestige of belonging to an elite organization, but they also faced demands for absolute obedience and willingness to carry out any order regardless of personal feelings or moral considerations. The KGB recruited heavily from Communist Party members who had demonstrated loyalty and ideological commitment, putting candidates through years of training that included foreign languages, surveillance techniques, recruitment methods, weapons training, and intensive study of Marxist-Leninist ideology. Vladimir Putin's career illustrates how the KGB shaped its officers and how those officers would later shape Russia after the Soviet collapse. Putin joined the KGB in 1975 after graduating from Leningrad State University, serving first in counterintelligence in Leningrad before being assigned to Dresden, East Germany from 1985 to 1990, where he worked under diplomatic cover, monitoring foreigners and recruiting agents. When the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989 and East Germany collapsed, Putin witnessed the implosion of the communist system he had served and the humiliation of Soviet power retreating from Eastern Europe. He returned to Leningrad in 1990 as the USSR was disintegrating, left the KGB in 1991 as it was being dissolved, and entered politics, eventually rising to become president of Russia in 2000. Putin's background in the KGB shaped his worldview, his distrust of the West, his belief in strong centralized control, his use of intelligence services to maintain power, and his willingness to employ methods, including assassination, propaganda, and coercion, that he learned during his KGB years, making modern Russia, in many ways, a continuation of KGB governance adapted to post-Soviet conditions. When the Soviet Union collapsed in December 1991, the KGB was officially dissolved and replaced by multiple successor agencies, including the FSB, which handles domestic security, the SVR, which conducts foreign intelligence, and other services that divided up the KGB's responsibilities. But the dissolution was organizational rather than substantive, as many KGB officers simply transferred to the new agencies, maintaining the same methods and objectives. The FSB under Putin has employed tactics directly descended from KGB operations, including surveillance of opposition, prosecution of dissidents on fabricated charges, control over media, and assassinations of critics both inside Russia and abroad. The legacy of the KGB extends beyond Russia to influence how authoritarian states conduct surveillance and control, as the comprehensive monitoring systems, informant networks, and pressure techniques the KGB developed have been studied and implemented by security services in China, North Korea, Iran, and other repressive regimes. The KGB demonstrated that modern technology, combined with human intelligence and willingness to use violence, could control large populations effectively for decades, a lesson not lost on contemporary authoritarian governments that employ digital surveillance and facial recognition alongside traditional informant recruitment to achieve similar control. Understanding what the KGB actually did requires recognizing that it was more than just an intelligence agency conducting espionage. It was an instrument of totalitarian control that touched every aspect of Soviet life, from monitoring private conversations to crushing political opposition to conducting assassinations abroad to stealing Western technology. The KGB's effectiveness came from combining human intelligence networks with sophisticated technical capabilities, ideological commitment with ruthless pragmatism, and patient long-term operations with violent action when necessary. The fact that a former KGB officer runs Russia today and employs methods learned during his intelligence career demonstrates that the KGB's dissolution in 1991 was a reorganization rather than an ending, and that the techniques of surveillance, control, and coercion the organization perfected continue shaping how authoritarian states operate. The KGB may no longer exist as an organization, but its legacy lives on in the intelligence services that replaced it. in the political culture of modern Russia and in the surveillance states that learned from its methods. The secret world of the KGB was a world where no one could be trusted, where the state monitored everything, where opposition meant destruction, and where the security of the regime always took precedence over human rights or individual freedom. That world shaped the lives of millions who lived under Soviet rule, influenced the course of the Cold War, and created patterns of governance and control that continue affecting global politics decades after the Soviet Union's collapse. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and subscribe for more history content covering wars, revolutions, and events that shaped the modern world.